So it's Thanksgiving weekend here in Canada, and I'm away, and I don't have ROVer with me, and I don't have even the Arduinos with me. What I do have is ROVer's brain. There it is. So one thing that I thought I would tackle while away is something that I don't need anything else for, other than ROVer's brain, which is the communication between ROVer, the tablet, and ROVer's website. So to give you a bit of background and kind of what makes this particularly interesting is one of the main goals behind ROVer is, of course, that he's going to be remotely operated, and that's going to be basically from any web browser. And I'm going to invite I don't know if all of you or some of you, I don't know how I'm going to regulate that aspect of it, but I'm basically going to open it up to whoever wants to help play with ROVer and kind of test different ideas and different commands and that sort of thing. So in order to make that possible, I want to make it web-based. And in order to facilitate that interface, there needs to be communication back and forth between ROVer and the server. So what I am tackling today is that communication. So basically sending information from ROVer to the server, recording that information. So ultimately, not today, but ultimately that information will be stored as kind of logs. So that kind of we'll be able to see, those of us who want to play with ROVer will be able to see what ROVer has done in what sequence and who gave the commands and that sort of thing. So you won't be able to get away with anything if you send a nasty command to ROVer. But yeah, so basically we need to store that information that's sent from ROVer to the server, and then when the server receives that information, we want to either make some interpretations based on that information and send back a response, or more likely or more common would be that we're sending commands to ROVer. So when ROVer is pinging the server for new commands, he'd get those commands in response. So there's a few moving pieces to this, as you can imagine. There's an update to ROVer's Arduino app, which has to take place. The sending and receiving of information on that end of the kind of communication line. And then similarly on the server side, which I'm going to be doing in PHP, we're going to be taking in that information, storing it in a CSV file. It's just a convenient way of doing it. I don't want to mess with the database for the log files. Maybe for other reasons, but I don't want to create a database for the log files. There's just going to be too many. And then, of course, having for the purposes of our test right now, just a rudimentary command back to ROVer, and then to actually prove that ROVer is receiving those commands from the server. So in both cases, we want to send information to one party and the other, and for each party to confirm receipt of that information. If we can do that, then basically we've got the foundation on which to build everything else. So let's take a look. Sorry for the shaking. I'm doing this from my lap, on my laptop, on my lap. But let's take a look at the first part of it, which is the Arduino, the Android app. As always, I will include links to my sources and the code that I'm going to walk you guys through on ROVer's website as part of this episode post, so you can find everything there. The source tutorial that I actually followed is actually very useful because there's a bit of misinformation out there as to what function calls to use for the HTTP post and stuff. So things have changed. There's some functions that have been deprecated by Google, so it's helpful to get kind of the correct, latest, current information. So I'll include that link. But what we're looking at here is the asynchronous class. So asynchronous, basically, it allows us to send and receive information in the background, so to speak. when I showed you a quick clip of this actually working, the test actually taking place on ROVer's app, there is some feedback, and I'm using that for testing purposes. The internet connectivity, excuse me, here is horrendous. So it's good to have some sort of visual indication as to whether something is getting through or not, because a lot of the time I'm not sure if something's getting through, not getting through because my code is bad or it's just not connecting to the internet. But basically, this first part of the code here, and don't worry, this is a fake URL, but this first set of information basically sets things up for the HTTP call. I've commented some things out as part of my testing, so that's really just for my benefit. But so basically what I was attempting to do here was different formats of how to send the information over to the server. Ultimately, it's just a nice text string. And these are just some test variables to send along to basically prove that it's functioning. So we set it all up, and then we pass it over to the server. And here we're actually already starting the process of reading back what the server has said to in response. So basically, this point here, it ends the process of us writing to the server. So right here, so we're writing bytes. Once we've done that, we've actually sent the information over to the server. We're closing the communication, and then we're reopening a kind of a listener to get the response back from the server. So what we're sending over, like I said, is just some string variables. This one, we're sending over a dynamic variable, a double, GPS longitude and latitude, to prove that basically that we can send text as well as floating integers. And then in response, we are going to look for 3 different types of variables in response. 2 text variables, a command type and a command target, and then another double variable in response, which is a latitude. We're basically just going to send back what we've received from ROVer, just to prove that we can send, again, both types of data back and forth. So, and that's pretty much it. That's the whole code. So this will be migrated over to a new class within ROVer's app, but for the purposes of this test, basically just to keep things simple, it's included in his main activity. So I'll just include this part on ROVer's site, and it's, like I said, it's a modified version of the tutorial code that I found online. So let's take a look at the receiving part of it, which is on the server. So let's take a look at the PHP. Okay, so here we've got the PHP side of stuff, the server side. So what we're handling here is when we get a post from ROVer's app, so this first part is basically the CSV handling stuff. So like I said, we're going to store the information that we receive into CSV files. We're going to then, in a future thing, in a future step, in a future episode, I'll talk about how we're going to handle the logs to keep a record of everything. But basically what we're doing here is we're opening up the CSV file and making that ready. So where the fun stuff starts is here. So basically when we hear, or when the script receives a post, we're going to, this is just some testing stuff, we're going to run through each of the post variables, get the name and value pair, set it up in an array. We're going to encode it as JSON, and then upload it to the server as a new file with the data and at the file path that we specified above. Of course, you would specify your own file paths. And just some error handling that's just temporary. And then down below is the other half of it, where we're setting up the commands. And as you can see, this is just some placeholder stuff. but the idea is we want to test 2 text variables and then a double floating integer that we're just taking the post value for latitude that we received and we're sending it back to ROVer's app. We're encoding it as JSON. So basically we set up an array, we're encoding it, and then we're just echoing it. So what will happen is basically when the app app functionality that we just looked at in the Android Studio has successfully sent it, it'll look for the response on the page, and the response on the page will essentially be this JSON code that's been outputted. And then we've got code in the Android app to decode that JSON and actually interpret the variables. So it's very simple. Obviously, this is just rudimentary stuff for testing purposes, and it'll get a lot more elaborate going forward. But again, for the purposes of today's test, we just want to make sure that we are able to actually communicate back and forth. So let's get everything uploaded to the server and to ROVer's Android app, and I'll show you what that looks like on Android and on the app. So I apologize for the grainy quality of these photos, but yeah, it is what it is. But what we're looking at here is kind of a before and after the post is sent, and I'll show you a quick clip of the actual sending functionality. But essentially what we're looking at on the left-hand side is what the screen on the app looks like before we send the post request, and then on the right-hand side we see what it looks like after the send post request. And this side-by-side was just easier than me troubleshooting the internet connection here. And the part that we're looking at is that very last line. Over on the left-hand side it says output view, and then over on the right-hand side it's replaced with the command target and latitude values that we've just received from ROVer. So once we receive that, we then trigger the PHP code to output our commands back. And once we receive the information from ROVer, we send the JSON code back, and once it's received by ROVer's Android app, it displays that in this output view text field. So let's take a look at the actual quick clip in action. So we're making great progress. We see it working on the app. Let's check now the server side of things and make sure that we've actually recorded stuff on the server, which it looks like we did. What we're looking at here is just a quick PHP output that I wrote up in order to view the CSV code. So basically I'm just reading in the file and displaying the CSV as an array dump. And we've got success. We're reading the text value, this temporary kind of fizz-buzz thing, and we're reading the longitude and latitude that ROVer is sending to us. And we can see here, if you look closely, that the longitude values change once in a while, from this one to this one, for example. And that always happens indoors because the reception for the GPS radio is just so weak. But nonetheless, I mean, it even adds more to our test, that the fact that it's changing, it's just that much more obvious that everything is working. And yeah, these values here is just the timestamp. Again, kind of setting things up for down the road where we're storing logs. So the CSV files are actually already being stored. I just haven't really figured out how to go about the log kind of stuff yet. Yeah, awesome. So we've got the Android app talking to the server, and that, like I said, really lays the foundation for everything going forward. Now we get to play with what it is that we want to send to the server and what we want the server to send to the ROVer. And kind of sky's the limit. We can do whatever we want. Now that we've got that communication channel open and we know we can send text, we can send float integers, we can send anything we want. So yeah, if questions, comments, suggestions, ideas for how to take full advantage of this functionality within ROVer, I'm all ears. Can't wait. Until next time. Cheers.